Well, what does it mean historically that the Spirit of God brooded upon the primordial waters? Like, what does that mean historically?
Well,
no one knows
I
what
agree.
that means historically.
I don't think
Right.
that at least most of Genesis or parts of Genesis are supposed to be. I mean, the Bible is a library, right? It's not a book, and that means that it's going to contain different genres.
That's for sure.
And so when I read
and some of them are more historically accurate, and some of them tilt more towards that kind of elusive. I don't mean elusive I mean ALLUSIV.
Elusive, yeah, sure.
Right? That elusive and symbolic form that characterizes Genesis 1.
So because there are different genres here, it depends on what story we're talking about. And I think that what I often observe you doing is we might talk about Christianity, and if you aren't comfortable committing to a historical ideal, you'll start talking about the Spirit moving over the face of the waters, which is obviously a much more mythological ideal, and not quite equivocating them, but moving between them too quickly and not delineating them enough. So if I asked you, do you think that the Spirit moved across the face of the waters, and you said to me something like, I think it's still happening.
Right, that is what I would say.
Hey, fair enough. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It always happens. It happened at the beginning of time, and it's always happening.
When somebody says, did the Exodus story happen? Did the Jews enslaved in Egypt break free of their slavery and move to the Promised Land across the desert for 40 years? Did that happen? You have also said, of the Exodus specifically, it's still happening.
Yes.
Now, to me, that's far more inappropriate than saying that the Spirit is still moving across the face of the waters, because I think what people mean there is, do you believe that these people in that time period actually did this in such a way that, for instance, might show up in an archaeological report?
Well, I think that's the simplest answer to that is probably.
Sure, and that's fine too. But
we don't know.
There is,
like, to the degree that there's been archaeological investigations into the kinds of biblical narratives that you've described, the archaeological evidence tends to fall on the side of historical accuracy in relationship to the Bible, quite surprisingly often.
Clearly, you've spent more time in Exodus than probably any person I've ever met in person, right? Clearly, the story sort of captivates you, and you think it's really important and can teach us a lot, right?
Yeah,
of course.
It's infinitely deep story.
I think most people speaking to you already know that you think that, right? And so when they ask you a question, when they suddenly say to you, but do you think it really happened?
Well, what the hell does that mean?
You must know that what they mean is what I was talking about a second ago, which is that sort of...
What? Okay, so fine. So it's easy just to turn this around. It's like, okay, what exactly happened in your historical account when Moses encountered the burning bush?
I don't need to know exactly what happened. What I need to know is
I'm not asking you specifically
I know.
Or attacking you for that.
What I need to know is that if I sort of went to the Egyptian desert at sort of the time that this story is alleged to have taken place in history, would I see a mass movement of Israelites from Egypt into the Promised Land? Would I see people with feet walking through the desert, leaving footprints?
Well, let's take it apart rationally. So,
but you also understand that when someone's asking that, and you like, even if you don't like the question, you must understand what someone's asking.
Oh yes,
and if that's the case,
understand many of the things that they're doing simultaneously.
Then you must also understand that when you then say it's still happening, people just go, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, well, I would say that's not my problem.
But it becomes a problem when you understand that someone's asking a quite banal historical question.
Yeah, but you don't get to do that.
But why not?
Because the stories that you're dealing with aren't banal.
I agree, but like
so you can't reduce them to something banal, even if it's what would you call it? Even if it's reassuring. This actually happened. Then what do you do with the burning bush? So this actually happened.
One comparison I would make is between this and talking about fiction more broadly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you got it right earlier. I would say you noted that the stories in the biblical library leap across genres.
Yes.
Right. Well, we know this because sometimes they're poetry and sometimes they're song. Yeah, exactly. And so in any given story, there's going to be historical account plus mythological overlay, and you have to be a discriminating reader to kind of see what's different, and you don't just get to say, well, all the mythological symbolism is historical reality. Yeah. It's like, no, it's not.
But here's the thing, for example. So like take a piece of trivial fiction like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Right? We say like, okay, did that happen? Now, I think that what you'd probably say is something like, well, I don't think the events literally occurred, but I think that they obviously get at something that's sort of perennially true about human nature.
Exactly.
But then suppose I said to you,
right. But hold on, they happened. They existed as a pattern.
But there's a scene in Forrest Gump when I think he meets the president. Is it JFK at the time? I think he goes and meets John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so I said to you, well, is JFK the like that specific part of that story? Is it true that JFK was the president?
Right.
And you would probably just say, yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say anything more complicated. And even though the subject as a whole of like, is Forrest Gump true? Is Hamlet true? That's a complicated question.
Very.
But specifically, when I say, but interestingly, there's this little point I want to make in this broader discussion. Do you think that JFK was actually the president? You would say yes.
Why do you think it matters to people? Like, I don't know. These are ancient accounts. Let's say
that's the biggest problem. Maybe that's the biggest problem that you have with the people who are asking these questions.
It is. And like, hopefully, what point are you trying to make here? So the point is, I know what the point usually is the people who are asking the question believe that true unerringly means objectively happened in history, like the things that we're seeing right now happen.
Yep.
It's like, well, no, that's not what those stories are like.